Welcome back. We will now hear the presentation of teksavvy Solutions, Inc. Please introduce yourself and your colleagues, and you may begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairperson, Vice Chairperson, Commissioners, and Commission staff. My name is Andy Kaplan-Murth. I'm VP of Regulatory and Carrier Affairs at teksavvy. With me today is Pierre Aubé, teksavvy's Chief Operating Officer, and Jessica Rutledge, Director of Regulatory and Consumer Legal Affairs. We're also joined in the hearing room by Stephanie Hosby, our Regulatory Analyst. We appreciate the opportunity to be here in what is the most critical regulatory proceeding for teksavvy ever. teksavvy is one of Canada's largest independent internet service providers and has operated for over 25 years. We're headquartered in Chatham, Ontario, and we have employees in Ontario and Quebec. We offer internet services in all 10 provinces. teksavvy is primarily a wholesale-based competitor, meaning that we purchase access to the incumbents' facilities in order to deliver internet services to our customers on our own networks. We also have our own facilities. We've invested in building a wireless LTE network in southern Ontario, and now our own fiber network in Chatham, Ontario, and surrounding areas. A large portion of serviceable addresses on that network are rural ones. This investment would not have been possible for us without our wholesale-based business.
Andy mentioned that teksavvy is one of the largest independent ISPs in Canada, but at this point, we are one of only a few meaningful competitors left. teksavvy itself has shrunk significantly in recent years due to the current regulatory environment. I'll be frank here. We have lost over 100,000 subscriptions since our peak. Many independent ISPs were in the same boat as us. As the Commission knows, within about a year of CRTC's last major wholesale decision in May of 2021, nearly all major wholesale competitors were acquired by incumbents. This includes Distributel and its affiliate Primus, eBox, Start.ca, vMedia, Oxio, Comwave, Akinak, and the list goes on. The exit of wholesale competitors is no surprise to us. The business case for wholesale has nearly been extinguished under the current regulatory framework. First, the rates finalized in 2021 make it impossible for wholesale competitors to compete. Second, wholesale competitors are left behind the curve with a lack of access to the technology we need to compete, such as FTTP. In this regulatory environment, competitors were and are faced with either watching their subscriber numbers decline or, as many did, sell their business. Finally, regulatory uncertainty and excessive delays disproportionately affect smaller competitors who do not have the same level of scale and capital to continue to compete while waiting years to learn what their main cost components will be. Let's be clear here. The exit of competitive wholesale options is detrimental to Canadians.
We are often asked why rates that were used in 2016 are causing so many issues over the last few years. It is a common misconception that preserving wholesale rates at 2016 levels just amounts to preserving the status quo. Instead, the evidence shows that there has been a global decrease in the cost of delivering internet services. Both the government-commissioned Wall report and the US FCC report showed declining international prices in broadband, which reflect this trend. But yet, those same reports show that Canada is at the back of those international price comparisons, as both the Competition Bureau and Dr. Chen have acknowledged. The incumbents have also made statements about their decreased costs in securities filings and investor calls. When it comes to fiber, Bell executives have said that its service and support costs tend to be 40% lower than they were on copper. TELUS executives have also stated that the cost to serve customers on fiber is significantly reduced, citing increased automation and an 80% reduced energy appetite compared to copper. Earlier this week, they actually said that was 85%. For cable, Rogers executives mentioned, for example, in a 2022 investor call that its cable-adjusted EBITDA for that year increased by 6%, primarily as a result of improved cost efficiencies. Wholesale competitors have spent the last 7 or 8 years not getting to realize those same cost savings. Wholesale access rates in 2024 are still almost the same as they were in 2016 in most cases, and incumbents continue to propose high wholesale rates in this proceeding.
The easiest way to illustrate the degree to which wholesale rates are inflated is through a comparison to incumbents' retail rates. Our interventions provide examples of the retail prices that incumbents charge compared to their proposed access rates. Dr. Chen, who appeared with CNOC earlier today, noted, for example, that for Bell's proposed FTTP rates, all retail prices were below their corresponding wholesale access rates by a wide margin, between $38 and $75. As the incumbents' flanker brands often price below their flagship, those brands will often have an even bigger gap. This is the case, for example, with the Distributel and eBox brands' fiber rates, which we've filed in this proceeding as additional comparisons. It's the same story for Rogers. When looking at Rogers' proposed wholesale rates in this proceeding, Dr. Chen found that all of Rogers' retail prices for Ignite Internet 50, 150, 500, 1.5 gigabit, and 2.5 gigabit are below the access rates for equivalent wholesale services. When using retail prices as a sanity check of incumbents' claimed costs, keep in mind that access rates are just one in a list of many cost inputs for competitors, including both other regulated costs and non-regulated costs. Other regulated costs for the service include capacity charges and installation and service fees. Our non-regulated cost inputs include equipment for customer premises, our own networking equipment and networking costs, marketing, overhead, and operational costs like people's salaries. Yet, even one component of our costs already exceeds the incumbents' retail prices. As Dr. Chen's report found, this sustained pattern of retail prices below wholesale rates shows that wholesale rates are inflated. It shows that wholesale rates must be significantly above the levels that will enable cost recovery and a fair rate of return on capital.
All of this means that we are left with a situation where the current wholesale rates actually help the incumbents sustain retail pricing above competitive levels. Canadians have not reaped the benefits of declining costs of delivering broadband the way the rest of the world has. Not only should the Commission take retail rates into account when fact-checking incumbents' claimed costs, but they should do so on a more proactive basis going forward. Rate setting takes time, which means there needs to be a regulatory mechanism to allow more nimble interim adjustments. Wholesale competitors should not be left stranded on 8-year-old rates again. An interim retail minus regulatory backstop would help accomplish this, where if incumbents price below their monthly access rates, wholesale competitors have the option of interim retail minus pricing. When retail minus pricing has been applied in the past, the CRTC has used a rate of retail minus 25%. This rate was used in 1999 and as recently in 2016. There is no reason to deviate from that here. The ongoing collapse of the wholesale market has shown that this type of measure is necessary.
The second reason why wholesale has declined is the lack of wholesale access to fiber. This should not be controversial. The Commission has long held that speed matching is required for competition, and that without speed matching, there is a substantial reduction in competition. As we've explained in our interventions, Bell touts how important its unmatched speeds are on fiber. It also advertises based on how much faster its internet offerings are than those offered on cable. This means that as long as wholesale competition is not feasibly open to fiber, the Commission is not enforcing its long-standing speed matching principle. But there's also enhanced reliability on fiber. As we mentioned, Bell estimates it needs 40% less service and support costs. The combination of speed and enhanced reliability means there is a growing subset of customers who do not consider other types of internet to be a sufficient substitute. In its recent motion seeking a stay of the Commission's temporary FTTP order, Bell described FTTP services as, and I quote, crucial to Bell's competitive position in the market. Certainly, it is crucial to competitors' ability to compete as well. There's evidence on the record showing that the share of wholesale subscribers served by ILECs has massively declined. Teksavvy subscriptions on Bell's network declined by 65% from October 2018 to October 2023. Meanwhile, ILECs have seen their own subscriber numbers increase. The Bureau found that the ILECs increase in retail subscribers from 2018 to 2022 was large enough to offset the decline in wholesale-based subscribers on their network. We also know that incumbents have been rapidly decommissioning their existing legacy facilities and replacing them with FTTP facilities. This means that the wholesale footprint has been shrinking, with more customers left without the option of wholesale at all, regardless of technology.
There is significant evidence on the record that wholesale high-speed access services, regardless of technology, meet the essentiality test. In applying this test, the Commission should not limit its policy consideration stage to some smaller set of policy factors. The Act requires it to make decisions in line with the statutory policy objectives and as informed by the policy direction. A policy analysis stage should consider any relevant objectives from these sources, rather than some limited set. We also ask the Commission to enforce its traditional speed matching rule in a manner that is agnostic of technology. If an incumbent offers a broadband internet service at retail, the equivalent wholesale service should be mandated by default. The Commission has long found that to relegate wholesale competitors to lower speeds would hinder their ability to compete and distort the market. Yet this is what has happened over the past 8 years. The Commission should not allow incumbents to disregard the speed matching rule through any further upgrades in technology, and should reject attempts by incumbents to carve out specific types of technology from mandated wholesale HSA. We have heard suggestions this week that perhaps wholesale competitors deliberately do not sell higher speeds. I can say that teksavvy would love to be able to sell high speeds to our customers, and we do try. Customer demand is shifting to higher speeds. We are not choosing to ignore that demand. That would not be a logical business choice. Instead, we have simply not been given the tools to allow us to serve it. The wholesale rates for many higher speed services do not allow us to compete with retail prices and market, and of course, we do not have access to fiber to enable us to sell the highest speeds.
Finally, we have seen the interim disaggregated regime not work out in practice. We agree with many interveners that the Commission should prioritize fixing the current aggregated regime. However, we also believe that the mandated disaggregated can and should operate in tandem with aggregated access. For now, the Commission can make a few simple tweaks to the disaggregated regime to fix unintended consequences while the two coexist. Based on the Commission's decision, teksavvy began investing in enabling disaggregated access at POIs where it predicted would have the most demand for FTTP services. This includes investing in network equipment and facilities at each of these POIs. As a result, if disaggregated access is no longer mandated, or if disaggregated rates continue to be set at inflated levels, teksavvy would actually be penalized for investing in facilities to enable disaggregated access at those locations. There's also the issue of the 3-year phase-out, which we believe should be removed.
The issues before you are complex, and the record is voluminous. We recognize that. But for smaller competitors like teksavvy, this is a critical and time-sensitive proceeding. We need significant reductions to the wholesale rates, and we need them critically. This includes the interim aggregated FTTP rates, which remain above many retail prices. Teksavvy is ready and excited to bring additional lower-cost options to customers, customers we have not been able to reach on the current wholesale footprint, or who we have not been able to offer their technology of choice. We want to compete fairly as part of a vibrant broadband internet market, and we hope the Commission lets us do that. Thank you for your time. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, teksavvy, for being here with us, and in fact, finishing off the hearing with us. We are really looking forward to the discussion. I will start with the questions, and then I will turn to my colleagues to continue the discussion. I know we have a lot of questions, so just a heads up. So maybe starting with pricing and competition at a very high level, and I asked the same question of CNOC earlier today. We've heard very different views about the state of competition in the internet services market. We've heard from Bell this week that the market has never been more competitive. We heard from Rogers about the intense competition. You've painted a bit of a different picture. Again, we heard from CNOC today that there's an affordability and competition crisis in Canadian telecom. Can you just comment on that?
Thank you. This is really the question that's at the core of the struggles that teksavvy has had, much of the competitive industry has had over the past, many years that the wholesale rates have been in play. The lens that we have won't be a surprise to know, is very different from Bell's. This is not about competitive interaction among any number of large incumbents and how that might drive down prices. This is about the wholesale HSA framework's purpose, which is to allow smaller competitors or other competitors to discipline the market power of the large incumbents who build the networks and would otherwise have a natural monopoly or the sort of natural market power. So our experience is the prices, the wholesale rates, are too high for us to effectively compete with incumbent prices, especially when it comes to their flanker brands, which are used deliberately to, in our view, target the wholesale sector.
And maybe I'll just add, incumbents have asked you to believe that things are more competitive than ever in broadband. And in doing so, they're sort of ignoring that their market share has increased, and they're ignoring consumer perspectives. They're disregarding independent studies that show Canada's rank, even when taking the costs into account, has decreased internationally. They want to rely only on their own funded studies, and they want to look at prices, absolute prices, without taking costs into account. So they might point to some price decreases over time in some provinces. But the problem with that is that's not really a measure of competitive intensity. Retail prices can decline for lots of reasons. And we've seen on the record that there's strong indications that the cost of delivering services have gone down. So, what incumbents haven't shown is have their margins gone down? Because if prices decreased because of increased competition, you might see that there was pressure on their margins. But what we see in their investor calls, there's only so much information available to us. What we see in their investor calls is, for example, Bell's last annual report, 2022, they reported that their wireline EBITDA margin actually increased relative to 2021. In their latest quarterly report, Bell said it had industry-leading wireline margins and room to compete on price. They also projected stable margins in wireline for 2024. To us, that doesn't sound like a company that's facing competitive pressure on their bottom line. And we think if we had properly costed wholesale rates, we could help bring prices down to where they should be. Andy spoke about the non-price aspects of competition, and we want to highlight that too, because even if a customer is able to get a good price for a short term, it might look great. What's going to happen when that price is increased a few times on their bill, and who's left to serve that customer? If they're not happy that it's the price increase is hidden on their bill, or they're not happy that they're waiting 30 minutes on the phone and they want another competitive option, who's going to be there to serve that customer? Do they really feel like they can take their money elsewhere when they're not pleased with the service quality of a incumbent? We'd like there to be a choice for that customer beyond the single person that might have, a single company that might have a wire to their home.
Thank you for sharing that with us, and you've touched on a number of things. I think we're going to come back on a number of those and have some follow-up questions. One of the things you just mentioned are consumer perspectives. And, you know, we heard on Monday, certainly from Open Media, about the consumer perspectives. You know, they'd shared a survey with us. They said that 78% of people said their internet is less affordable today than it was in 2019. You know, a lot of comments were shared with us from PIAC, Open Media, Manitoba Coalition, about affordability and pricing and choice. But at the same time, you know, I think as you've alluded to, some interveners have said that, you know, consumers are getting a lower price per gigabyte and, you know, things are rosy. Can you comment on that?
Customers, our experience, I'm going to ask Pierre to weigh in here because of the customer the customer experience, but customers come to us all the time telling us that they want an alternative that is not a large incumbent. They have a bad relationship or a bad view of them, and they're looking for a real independent alternative. We hear that all the time. Sometimes they will even pay more when we're in a position where our prices are not actually competitive with a large incumbent. Sometimes they're willing to pay a premium in order to go with us. Again, that does not serve the purpose of the wholesale framework, and it's not sustainable for a small competitor like us. But for the past number of years, that's the situation we've been in, and we've still seen customers coming to us. For the most part, we have found the lower prices or lower speeds or medium range speeds, especially on cable, have been the ones where we've been able to offer services a little bit more profitably. And so at times, those have been services that we've promoted and customers have used. And so I think kind of naturally over time, our customer base might have, you know, might be a lower speed, lower priced customer base. But it's a product of kind of, I don't want to say rigged wholesale rates, but the wholesale rates are constructed in a way that kind of funnels us into that sort of business model. Do you want to speak to sort of the prices that are available and what customers come looking for?
Sure. I mean, customers are coming to us because they are tired of being what we call gouged by the pricing that's out there in the market. So ultimately, they will come in with a promotional rate, and then 6 months or a year later, they're now at a very high elevated rate, and there's no way for them to find relief on that. So then they're looking for an alternative to get a better sort of deal for the customer, but something more stable. We had done a study looking at what do consumers want out of teksavvy, and one of the things they were asking about was stable pricing, right? We don't want to play this yin and yang game all over the place. We want to have a provider that's going to offer us excellent service and be real, be truthful, and give us, and be there for us when we actually need them. So in terms of pricing out there, I see all the time, we're monitoring the incumbents and the flanker brands daily, and I can tell you that some of the flanker brands, it's almost like they have a connection with emails or something, because one of them will change their prices at 12, and a couple hours later, the other one will match exactly the same price at 2 in the afternoon, and they're just playing. They're playing with that price to try and control the market, not offer a better deal for the customer. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe we can just continue on with retail internet packages, and you've given some examples of how the retail internet packages can be, priced lower than the wholesale or tariffed price. So, we've heard from some interveners that this is just consumers getting a good deal. You sort of touched on this. Could you just maybe respond to that?
Lower prices for consumers, lower prices like that have a short-term benefit for consumers. The end result of this, if wholesale can't compete with that and can't serve its purpose of disciplining market power, is one or two incumbent providers and no options for customers. That is a bad competitive outcome. It may be short-term lower prices, but the incumbent is doing that to drive out competition and eventually will be a monopoly provider. We have a framework in place specifically designed to avoid that happening. It has not functioned properly for the past number of years, and these are the changes that need to happen in order to allow us to play that role that the framework is designed to allow us to play.
Okay, thank you for that. Most of your customers are in Ontario and Quebec. Could you talk to us a little bit about what's kept you focused on Central Canada? Are there specific factors that have limited your expansion more broadly across the country?
So, I mean, Pierre might have more comments on where we've targeted specifically. We have tried to expand across Canada, and we do sell in all provinces. First of all, we started in Ontario and Quebec, so that was sort of our starting market, and then we looked to expand. We don't actually see a difference in consumer interest in Alberta or BC. Like, we don't see a lack of interest in wholesale in the West. We actually find that we have operational challenges in getting over there and expanding as much as we'd like to. I think you heard a bit from CNOC earlier about the Shaw network, now Rogers, requiring several different connections in a given province. So that's one difference that, for us, we might see, okay, we can get enough of a customer base there to merit interconnecting, but certainly a smaller wholesale provider might not find that they could reach the whole province easily. And then there's lots of operational challenges too. I'm sure Pierre will have more examples of this, but the Shaw wholesale process doesn't even have a portal. So you want to add a customer on Shaw, you have to email them. Maybe the customer asks for, an appointment tomorrow, but it takes 2 days to get an email back. So you're left in this limbo where you might take a month to sign up a customer, and that just doesn't scale. It doesn't allow you to add customers at the rate you'd like. That's a real disincentive, together with wholesale rates that are inflated, that, it's hard to sort of decide to target that area and go in really strongly when you face those types of challenges on top of the existing challenges that we see in just the framework overall.
Yeah, just to echo the comments, when we can't properly qualify a customer out west, and we're sending an email to try and get that customer online, it's much, much harder for us to actually do sustainable growth. We've also seen that whenever we actually push it hard out west, we get multi-days and multi-week delays to actually get our customers online. So there's the incentive to continue to push there is harder for us because we want to provide a great service to our customers, but we're not able to. We're saying, okay, we'll get you online, in 3 weeks, but you can do it with the incumbent the next day or a couple of days later. So there's a disincentive from us to try and do that there. And the other comment on the rates out west as well is an issue there.
Maybe I'll just add that it may be, this is a difference in processes, operational challenges among different carriers. It's particularly stark maybe when you look at the West and Central, because there's clearly delineated territories for different carriers. But even in Ontario and Quebec and Atlantic Canada, there's more carriers at play, so you may not see regional differences play out, but each of those carriers also has different processes and different operational challenges. It's easier to sign customers up or support their services on some carriers than others. So I guess I'd caution seeing this as regional differences as opposed to carrier differences that happen to sort of fall very neatly along regional lines.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I just put a general question to you about urgency, because you've spoken about urgency, CNOC spoke today about urgency, the urgency of this proceeding and decisions flowing from this proceeding?
We see this as very urgent. Is the question how urgent this is?
And why? And why?
We have been under enormous pressure for certainly the past 5-6 years, but really a lot of the processes, a lot of the issues you're looking at now have been at play for 10 years. You've seen other competitors exit the market after being part of the same fight that we are. They were strong advocates, making many of the same arguments that CNOC did and the same arguments that we make. We are under all of those same pressures. Now, it's difficult to be here as a service provider in a public hearing where our customers are also aware and say that we are, in peril in some way. We're fine. I want to assure people that we're here, we're still providing service. But we cannot continue to wait in the hopes that the regulatory regime will one day catch up. We've been running on hope for a very long time. That hope ran out for some competitors. We're still here. I don't know how long that lasts, but no rational business runs on hope forever.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we can continue on the topic of acquisitions, because we've heard a lot about that. And even this morning, there was a lot more, I would say, kind of granularity added to the perspectives on that, the concerns about who is acquiring these businesses. Certainly, we heard concern from both CNOC and BCBA about who's coming in to build these businesses, like who else is coming in behind. So we've heard that perspective. I'm wondering if you can just sort of react to what we should read into these acquisitions, who's buying them, why others are not coming in.
Well, maybe I'll start with why others aren't coming in, and it ties a bit back to the urgency question, really. teksavvy wouldn't have entered right now. Like, we're still here because we were already a company and we have some hope that we'll get some regulatory relief at this point. But, this is not a market where a wholesale competitor would look at it and say, there's a viable business case for me to grow and build and innovate. If the rates were right, maybe they would. And I guess what we see with the acquisitions, there was some suggestion earlier this week that everyone was just ready to retire. I think you should probably look at the reason they decided that was the right time, all within 1 to 2 years, to exit the market. From our perspective, we would say it's because they were looking at their business either declining or selling it at that point. And you should really look at the reason why their business was declining.
Yeah, I think they were struggling to find or look for a path forward because we've been waiting for so long. And just to echo Jessica's, we saw the decline. I talked about how 100,000 decline from teksavvy. I guarantee you those businesses had similar declines, maybe not the same scale because they were just not as large, but they would see some similar declines, and they saw no path forward. And all of a sudden, these valuations came in, these high valuations came in, and they just said, "Okay, I'm out," type thing.
So you touched on the fact that teksavvy had considered selling at some point. You said you're running on hope. We're still here. I appreciate that we are in a public forum. Is there anything that you could share with us in terms of your thinking? Because it seems as though there was a change.
I can't share a lot of details, but we were under the same pressures as all of those other businesses. There were high valuations in the market for competitors. Like any business would, I think we considered a range of options for our future. And in the end, we did not sell, we didn't change our ownership, and we're not for sale.
Okay, thank you. So just talking a little bit about teksavvy's business model, can you just share with us how you attract customers to your service?
Sure. I mean, like every other service providers, we do marketing, and we do marketing through our Google platforms and through our out-of-home or throughout Canada. We do that throughout Canada, and we try and differentiate ourselves by the type of customer service that we offer. So we are proud to be a award-winning, Canada-based contact centers. And we also have, we also focus a lot on the innovation of ensuring our centers are working as optimally as possible, where not many places you'll see this, but we actually have a ring, ring, hello most of the time. So we invest more in our people to ensure that the customer really gets the proper service. Call teksavvy, you get, somebody says hello type thing. And so I think those things as well, I mean, how do we acquire? Of course, we do some promotions right now. We have no choice but to do aggressive promotions to try and compete with some of the stuff that's in market, to try and stop some of the churn of the decline, because there's just no path forward. Some of those promotions are below the tariff costs that are currently out there for sure.
And maybe we'll just also speak about the sort of independent advocacy voice we bring. We do have a lot of customers that resonates with. We don't own media properties. We don't have conflicting IP ownership. So that also means we don't have an interest in, blocking customers' access from certain things or maybe tracking data. We don't have those same interests, and so we've advocated strongly in the past for open internet. We've taken cases to court to protect our customers' data from IP owners that are looking to access customer data. So, I mean, that's something that we see resonates with a lot of our customers, and we think we're sort of uniquely positioned, and other independent competitors are uniquely positioned to bring that sort of advocacy voice as well.
Okay, thank you. So teksavvy is also a network operator. You've deployed fiber in parts of southern Ontario. What led you to do that as opposed to using wholesale access to serve those customers?
Pierre may be able to speak to this more firsthand, but that area was neglected by large carriers. The facilities serving Chatham, before we started building our fiber, only allowed very slow speeds. I think that's true for both Bell and Cogeco, which is the incumbent cable company there. And it was a source of great frustration. Obviously, teksavvy is a very significant employer in Chatham. Many people in Chatham have some connection to teksavvy, and teksavvy has a higher penetration there than anywhere else. And I would hazard to guess, not by coincidence, it was neglected by the incumbents. We decided to just get ahead of that and focus on building our fiber network there. We already had our fixed wireless network that was serving a lot of the communities outside of the city itself. And so part of it was a natural fit to upgrade fiber to towers, and then also use that experience with fiber to build fiber to the home in Chatham and some surrounding towns.
Yeah, the top speed was, in most places, it was about 15 megs. If the qualification was working properly, or on the cable network, it was either up to 100 megs or whatever it was, and then congested as well. So customers were complaining, saying, "Look, we're getting degraded service." So we decided to invest in the fiber network in Chatham, in our hometown, which just so happens it's one of those hometowns where a certain incumbent decided to overbuild fiber as well. Just saying, after we started laying our fiber.
And what were the challenges that you faced in deploying fiber in Chatham-Kent?
We didn't bring a technical person with us to talk about the network build. It's been a learning process, but, you know, we hired consultants and learned how to do it. We got the equipment that we need. We built a team. We hired people. And, you know, we've encountered, I think, all of the sort of similar challenges to what you'll hear from rural builders, access to poles, and we've participated in the support structure proceedings, you know, information, sort of a lack of information about rural transport. We participated in the transport proceeding, just sort of navigating tower structure rules and things like that. I think a lot of that is sort of, you know, I guess growing pains or building capacity. You know, there's a way in which large providers enjoy these efficiencies of scale where they know these kinds of operations. They can descend on a town, bring construction crews, and build fiber very quickly. I would say that there's an advantage to having more smaller providers building that capacity and local jobs and local expertise, and building out more smaller municipal networks of the type that we did. It encourages a kind of innovation, capacity building that I think the incumbents can't do, and is, you know, I think an important counterbalance to, you know, efficiency arguments about being the biggest and most capable.
Thanks for that. And are you able to share whether you are planning to deploy fiber in other communities?
At the present time or not, no.
Maybe that's an opportunity to just also say that our fiber plans were much bigger previously. This was all playing out before the 2021 rates decision. And when we were planning and building our fiber, when that decision came out, we basically immediately cut our plans to build any fiber that we weren't basically committed to. We had some agreements for funding and other similar things, similar arrangements. We completed what we needed to, and we did not build the rest. We cut about 50% of our plans.
So you've sort of touched on this, but how reasonable is it to expect wholesale-based providers to build their own fiber networks?
I think it is actually one of the goals of the wholesale framework. We've always talked about a ladder of investment in this whole policy realm. You could have a framework that just allows a small number of, or some number of competitors to operate in the market and possibly tread water essentially and discipline incumbents' prices. That doesn't contribute very much extra. It creates a competitive effect in the end user market. But those providers are always going to be sort of under the incumbent's thumb in a way. If it's properly tuned, you will have competitors who grow enough that they can then build parts of their own networks. Maybe some transport, and we'll touch on disaggregated, I hope, and maybe even our own fiber to the home networks locally. That has been part of the goal, to allow us to continue or to grow and become, you know, local service providers with the kinds of facilities that that people expect a service provider to have.
And I would say as well that how reasonable it is to expect depends on the market, of course. There will be some markets where if an incumbent has already built there, it would not be reasonable to expect that, you know, someone would overbuild, depending on, you know, the size of that market, the density, a number of factors. But how reasonable it is to expect us to build facilities, of course, depends on the wholesale rates, because, you know, if the wholesale rates are properly set, then we may have enough density in an area where we'd have a reason to build there. and we might have enough money to actually invest in it. But if the wholesale rates are as they are now, it's certainly not reasonable for us to invest in those facilities.
So maybe just picking up on that, we've obviously heard a lot about wholesale rates and costs. You spoke today about incumbents' costs decreasing, but wholesale competitors are not realizing those same cost savings. We've heard a lot about. We've heard from the incumbents, some incumbents saying that the wholesale rates are artificially low, they're below cost levels. TELUS told us that we can't compare retail rates and wholesale rates. That kind of comparison is misplaced. So there's been a lot said on that. Is there anything else that you wanted to add in terms of costs and rates? I mean, again, you talked about this in your opening. Is there anything additional on that?
I feel like you may have taken Vice Chair Scott's Goldilocks question from him. On costing, I would just say that the Commission already recently made a decision about Phase 2 costing and to use retail pricing and other factors as sort of a reasonableness test. The sort of suggestion that in this situation we would tweak the rates in some other ways to try to find some kind of sweet spot, is a bit of a concern. I think it's important that the rates are correct, but I think that it is important to follow a process to arrive at those correct rates. So, our view is that the Commission should apply the established rule, Phase 2 costing, using retail rates as and other factors as a kind of reasonableness test. We think the appropriate rates will come out of that, as well as, I guess, a retail minus option when costing processes take too long because it's too difficult to wait.
Sorry, Vice Chair Scott, I thought your Goldilocks question was a bit of a different question. We'll see what happens. I just had two other areas that I wanted to cover and then maybe just a couple of final questions and then I'll turn things over to Vice Chair Scott. Just with respect to the limits on wholesale access, because this is something we've heard a lot about, there have been a lot of proposals out there. So if the Commission were to mandate aggregated FTTP, some parties have proposed, for example, that companies with relatively small fiber deployments, like cable companies, shouldn't be subject to a wholesale mandate. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and is ILEC FTTP enough for teksavvy?
So maybe on the question of, who should have access, should there be limits, we've talked about this a lot because in theory, teksavvy would love everyone to fairly compete on wholesale. We think wholesale is, a great and viable path for competition and to combat that natural monopoly or duopoly that, the physical lines kind of bring. But then we also have to look at who are these players we're talking about. Sometimes, there have been suggestions that, these would be the strongest competitors. The evidence shows us that incumbents don't have the same incentives to compete fairly and discipline each other's market power. And the point of wholesale is to discipline their market power. If you look at wireless right now, a customer has access to the big three. And yet, at this point, the prices aren't competitive. The big three still have market power. They don't seem to discipline each other's market power. In Rogers and Shaw, the Competition Bureau found that there was evidence that they coordinated prices, that they did not target each other's home markets, so they were afraid of retaliation in another market, and didn't put forward promos in each other's prices. They talked about not doing something irrational for fear of retaliation. These are not players who have historically been rivalrous with each other. They have this illusion of competition and maybe they discipline each other a little bit, but we're talking about real competitive discipline where we don't have that same, those same sort of history of coordination motivations that they might have. So because of that and because of the abilities that the big three would have to use their market power, especially in other adjacent markets, to then leverage into the wholesale internet market. We don't think that at this time, the wholesale HSA framework should be open to the big three. And I think we would agree as well that, with CNOC's proposal, that it shouldn't be open to incumbents in general outside of their own territories. And we think that sort of strikes the right balance. In their own territories.
And so, because the large incumbents are currently using wholesale, like if you think about TELUS through Koodo, for example, is that having an impact on your business?
So it's funny. I think that's might be why we're actually talking about this now, is because the wholesale rates are not properly costed now, so they can't compete that well using the tariff rates. I think what their worry is that you'll set wholesale rates that do follow phase two and are properly costed. And at that point, incumbents might be able to leverage their market dominance in mobile, or just their large sort of well-capitalized corporations to offer more targeted deals. I don't know if, Pierre, you have thoughts on what they're doing right now?
I mean, it goes back to what we were just saying, is ultimately they're using that power to, promote, use heavy marketing in those throughout Koodo to try and grow their brands. But we haven't seen a tremendous amount of churn on that side, personally, so far.
Okay, thank you for that. Just in terms of the other limits on wholesale access, because I'm sure you've been following a lot of the proceeding, the other restrictions that have been put forward are, an access holiday or head start. We've heard about speed caps. Is there anything there that you would like to respond to?
We don't think that those other solutions are appropriate. We think they undermine the purpose of wholesale. They might address specific concerns from incumbents, but they do so at the expense of competition. This solution of limiting incumbent access in this way addresses those concerns and also promotes competition. So, our view is that once you look at how a wholesale HSA would play out with appropriately costed rates, where incumbents are limited in these ways, then we think that those concerns around speeds or specific facilities or even new builds are not as serious concerns. The impact from the small competitors who will be there will be, smaller than the impact if you had all of the incumbents operating in the same way, and that sort of thing. And then that sort of obviates the need for a sunset period or a regulatory holiday on new builds.
Okay, thanks very much. On investment, obviously we've heard a lot about this. Incumbents have said they will reduce their investments, or some have said, if we give access to fiber networks. You've said that those claims are tired threats. We heard from CNOC that this is a myth, and the threats of decreased investment are not credible. Are you concerned that incumbents will invest less? I'm not concerned that they will invest less. They have business decisions to make, and they might look at the numbers and decide to change their investment plans. I will tell you that wholesale rates certainly had an impact on our investment plans, and so it wouldn't surprise me if they have an impact on incumbents' investment plans. What fills that gap, though, is an open question. If wholesale rates were set properly, providers like teksavvy and other competitors, I'm sure, would be in a better position to build more networks to fill some gaps. Many of us are in rural areas, and some communities would prefer to have a local provider or
non-incumbent, non-large incumbent provider build in their area. That has been our experience.
And yeah, I mean, I was going to give the example of Build Nova Scotia, where they said, you know, they didn't see Bell making investments in their area, so they took it upon themselves to make those investments. It's not the strict dichotomy between investing by incumbents and competition. There's a potential difference, different equilibrium that could be reached. Yeah, I just wouldn't. I guess we would caution you to stop thinking about investment from the lens of will Bell invest, and think about who will be able to invest and how will we reach those communities, not simply how will Bell choose to make its allocate its profits. And you did hear earlier this week, I think, from Mr. Bragg, who said there's always the risk if wholesale rates are set too high that the incumbent might keep those profits in his pocket. You can't, there's no guarantee that they will keep investing. They may have already reached an equilibrium where they decide to, you know, slow down their fiber investment. And if you compare to the US, maybe that indicates, you know, that we might be reaching that equilibrium as it is. So obviously we are concerned about customers getting access to high quality networks. We just also would like to be able to serve those customers.
Maybe I'll just also say this feels like kind of a crossroads in terms of policy making. If you know, there's a policy outcome here that is to encourage competition. If you achieve that through, if you achieve that by prioritizing the ability for a small number of extremely powerful large companies to continue to build out more networks that then make themselves even more powerful, especially through mechanisms like regulatory holidays, then you've chosen a policy path that I think will not achieve the goal of increasing competition and will continue down a road where a small number of companies sort of control that market. Whereas you have an opportunity here to choose a path where the regime, rates, and access are tuned to allow smaller providers to join the market that will have some impact on large incumbents, surely. However, the related regimes will adjust to fill related policy goals. So government funding, broadband funding programs, and the CRTC's funding program was tuned to the environment that it was in, and the sort of business cases that could be made. If in order to achieve this policy goal of increasing competition, that changes the sort of tuning of what business cases can be made, and the government needs to subsidize more builds, that seems like an appropriate use of government funds that achieves related policy goals.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you've answered a couple of my questions on investment. Let me just ask two other questions. One is with respect to copper, removing copper. You've noted significant concern about ILECs removing copper when they deploy fiber. Can you maybe help us understand what the impact is on your business when incumbents decommission copper? And then maybe as a second part, I'll just throw it out there now, if we were to mandate aggregated FTTP access, would that be enough to address any of those concerns?
I'll start, and I'm sure that you both will want to jump in on this. There's at least two major concerns with decommissioning copper, and let's just focus on ILECs because I think it's clear that ILECs are doing this, whereas cable companies are maybe doing it for different reasons and in different ways. And anyway, we have an application open about that issue, so maybe we'll not spend as much time on it. Two major concerns. One is just the simple reduction in the footprint available to us. This has been going on for a long time. Maybe it has accelerated recently, But for years, we have complained that facilities are being removed, or at the time, what we were discovering was it was more rotting in the field. So that is, and I'm not a technology guy, but my understanding is the copper line from your home goes back to, maybe it's the D-SLAM, maybe it's somewhere else, where it plugs into ports, and those ports don't work eventually. Some ports are marked that they're not working, and so you run out, even though the copper is there and has not been decommissioned, there are no ports available anymore to connect customers. And this has been a very frustrating obstacle to even reconnecting customers who previously had a DSL service. You can imagine you had a DSL service at your home, you disconnect it maybe for a short period, and maybe you switch to cable and now you're coming back to DSL and you're told address isn't serviceable. Not because the copper's been removed, but because there are no available ports in the neighborhood. And there's really no oversight of those available ports. So that was sort of an older version of this, and we've seen that happening for a very long time. Now they're just, it seems, removing copper, and that's just a reduction in the footprint available to us. When you talk about this, I want to encourage you to think about the impact on existing customers as well as serviceable market. So yes, maybe they'll go down the street and remove the copper at house after house and then not remove it at a house that's served by wholesale in order to keep that copper available. At least our customer doesn't get disconnected, great, but we have lost this serviceable, this serviceable neighborhood otherwise. So that's one concern. Another concern is just the operational challenges that are raised when some addresses are fiber and some are copper. When we knew that they were copper in the past and we know that address should be serviceable and now it's no longer serviceable, maybe by the same person, maybe not by the same person. It presents real operational challenges to qualifying addresses and getting customers signed up. I think this is a larger problem on cable than on the ILECs, but it is directly related to this kind of decommissioning copper.
Yeah, ultimately, what it comes down to is we need to be able to offer an alternative to that customer. You're saying FTTP, but FTTP at the current rates, it's just not feasible, ultimately, is what this comes down to. So if there's a mandated FTTP with reasonable rates, where we're able to convert those customers over, then I see where there's a path forward there.
Yeah, I think ultimately our view is that it's premature right now to be talking about sunsetting FTTN or forbearing from FTTN. I think in practice, the availability of FTTP will mitigate some of the harm to us from the removal of copper, but it is very uncertain right now. I think it's premature to make the choice to not require DSL and switch over entirely to FTTP.
Okay, thank you for that. I just have one final question, and that is around the quality of service issues we've heard about from the wholesale provider's perspective. We've heard about that from Videotron. We heard about that from CNOC. The issues facing competitors, but sort of to the giant incumbents is how it was put to us, like customer onboarding. You talked about some operational issues today in the West. I don't know if that's something different, but could you maybe talk to us a little bit about those issues and what the impact is?
Sure. I have a customer right now in Chatham that has been waiting to get online for 2 months now, and we've been trying to work with an incumbent to get this resolved, and we just can't. We can't seem to get to a proper path of getting this customer online for various reasons. Techno show, new line require, whatever it is, reason it is. That is pretty much across many of the footprints that we deal with. Either it's we don't have access to the qualification data, we have limits on qualification data, we are not able to get a proper dispatch time, customers are getting subpar system, or their customers are being cross-sold when they're being actually installed by the incumbent. So many of those service qualities we experience all day long. It's quite interesting. We had to build our own database, our infrastructure, to try and understand which address. So Andy touched on the address. So we knew it was, serviceable before, no longer serviceable afterwards. The only reason we know that is because we had that customer before, and because through whatever qualification tool that we would get with the incumbent, they would just tell us it's not serviceable. They would have told us they removed the equipment to actually get there. So those happens all the time. It's just part of the business that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Maybe I'll just touch a little bit more on quality of service and also kind of operational rules, which I see as both being part of this quality of service picture. But really, this is the kind of thing that the more you dig into any one of these issues, the more surprising issues and problems you find. And it's one of the reasons there does need to be, I think, a dedicated process that looks into what these challenges are. And I agree with CNOC's proposal that there should be an inquiry and report as a starting point. I would point to the application that was made in 2014, I think it was. It might have been 2013, but the decision was 2015-40. That was supposed to address a number of operational challenges. That decision spun off into recommendations from the Commission that CNOC and other parties have a number of bilateral or resolve some issues bilaterally with incumbents, and resulted in 3 issues that were sent to a CISC committee. That CISC committee worked for a number of years to produce 2 reports. One of those reports was finalized. I would say by the time it was finalized, some of the issues that were resolved in it were already out of date. The other report that was produced was a non-consensus report for which we're still waiting for a decision from the Commission. It is not the most important thing, but I just, use it as an example of, how I think difficult it is to resolve these issues at a CISC committee. So I support CNOC's proposal for that. Quality of service issues, of course, there's a quality of service regime that results in the collection of some data. In our experience, that has not been useful. We don't think that data generally reflects our experience. It feels like a bit of a numbers game. There's no enforcement mechanism. There's no, retail comparison to be made, and we're not sure what the value of it is going to be to the Commission. My view is that that was sort of the first step taken by the Commission to start off with collecting data, and then let's see where that goes. And I think it is going to be time soon for the Commission to think about the next steps for that quality of service regime.
I just want to add one little point is we've gotten really good at dealing with some of these issues, with the service quality issues with some of our providers, where we actually went out of our way and got some wireless hubs that it's an added cost that we send to our customers when we know we won't be able to resolve the issue with the incumbent for weeks or days on end. So we go above and beyond, try and get the customer online temporarily while we try and resolve the issue, because we're not able to properly resolve the issue in a timely fashion with the incumbent. So.
Yeah, and the way we think of that, sorry, just to add to that, because it's a great point, is that we know that incumbents are going to fail in these ways so often that we have built that failure into our system and built systems internally in order to accommodate those failures, because that's actually more efficient to us than even dealing with those failures, on a one-off basis through a dispute mechanism or complaining, escalating it internally at the incumbents. That sort of mechanism does not scale. You can do that sometimes, but not at scale.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, teksavvy, for answering my many questions. Thank you to my colleagues for being so patient, because I know they have other questions. Vice Chair Scott, I hope you still ask your Goldilocks question. I think we all do. Over to you.
I probably will ask it just for consistency. Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, but that's okay. And so you've covered everything from operational issues to existential issues, and I think my questions are going to do the same. And I want to start with retail minus because we haven't really discussed it much this week. So to be clear, you're proposing retail minus only on an interim basis, recognizing the time it takes to do cost-based rates well. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. We don't really see a retail minus as sort of a sustainable long-term rate-setting mechanism, and we think that phase two, when it's properly applied and properly costed, should work. It's more an issue of how long it takes to do that, and being able to respond to declining costs that incumbents might realize that we aren't able to realize, and we often see that their retail prices sort of indicate to us that they are sort of realizing those cost savings. So that's part of it, yeah.
Okay, because so this week I've asked a number of people for undertakings on their retail costs, recognizing that the rack rate on their website may or may not have much relation at all to the rate that customers are paying. So operationally, when you talk about a retail minus, the minus part is pretty clear. What's the retail number that we should be starting with?
I don't think this is a novel solution. The Commission has applied it before, and I think in that case, it was the lowest price available in the retail market. We're not fans of retail minus. I think one of the attractive things about retail minus is that nobody's particularly a fan of it. It might create the incentives to provide appropriate costing, clear, transparent costing information and arrive at properly costed rates more efficiently.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so on the rates now and into the Goldilocks zone question, and the reason I keep coming back to it is because it really is the heart of this whole discussion, because it's the heart of the wholesale framework and it's the heart of your business model, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But so are you confident then that phase two costed wholesale rates properly applied would create enough margin for you to put a service into the market that your customers find attractive and delivers the benefits in terms of quality and price that consumers are looking for?
I think the Commission has already made the choice that phase two costing with this, additional reasonableness test is the right way to arrive at rates. And we like the certainty of that, and we would like the Commission to apply the established test rather than creating some ad hoc, rate setting mechanism for this proceeding alone. You're right. There's some kind of I am hopeful that results in rates that work. I think that hope is based on my very limited understanding, admittedly, of how phase two costing works, and that it, is based on costs and provides an appropriate incentives and compensation for incumbents. Will it allow competitors to compete? We hope that it will, but in terms of if phase two costing and a reasonableness test gets you to sort of a range, and the question is going to be, where in that range should rates be? Then we think a properly tuned framework would allow you to set those rates low enough that competitors would be able to meaningfully participate in the market and grow. I say properly tuning it, meaning some of those limitations, like limiting where incumbents can use wholesale services as a way of sort of reducing the risk to them of the wholesale framework, as a mechanism of reducing their margins.
And what about the suggestion we heard this week from a couple of players that because they will often sell they'll sell their internet access below cost and then make up the profitability on other parts of the bundle, other services that they offer, with I think some implied suggestion that you ought to do the same because that's what consumers are looking for. is that viable? Is that the business that you're in? Is that what your customers want? Is that a fair suggestion, or is that an unfair suggestion?
We do the same. I mean, we have to sell these services below cost. If we don't do that, we would not have competitive prices. So I think, everybody does that. Oh, I don't know that everybody does that, but I mean, that's certainly a dynamic in the market. And yes, we sell below cost, and then we take however long it takes to start making a profit on that customer. And we hope that we try to provide great service to keep that customer long enough that we can make that up. And I think that's sort of the basic, I guess, whatever business proposal of selling that service below cost. The problem is that we're being forced to do that by large incumbents who have market power. We're being disciplined by them. And the whole framework is just working sort of inside out right now. I would expect an efficient framework with proper rates to also involve very vigorous competition that resulted in some people selling below cost and planning on how long they could keep customers in order to make up that difference. That could certainly still happen, but it would be motivated in different ways. I know that I keep returning to it, but it really is a matter of seeing just price interaction between businesses as competitive, or is it fulfilling the competition goals of the framework?
Just want to add one little thing there. One of the things that people tend to forget is when we buy the service, when we're paying the incumbent for the service, we also offer the support to that customer. So in essence, we only involve the incumbent when we absolutely need to. So when the initial install happens, or if there's something with the line that needs to be repaired afterwards. All that stuff that happens in the middle, the billing, the customer service, the speed upgrades, all those other things, we support that through our contact centers. We handle hundreds of thousands of calls a month. And they tend to forget that though that lowers their costs slightly, because now they're not providing support for that. So that would be like a win for them. We're giving you a connection. Yes, you're not able to bundle on that customer, but guess what? You provide a lot less support to that customer because we're actually taking care of that support for that customer. So.
Thank you. So recognizing that you don't have the same maybe scope and scale as some of the other companies that are deploying fiber these days, but you've nonetheless built a fiber project, what would have been the economics of your fiber build if you'd been required to open it up to others? Would you still have gone ahead?
I mean, it's hard for me to say in terms of the numbers. I don't have the business case. But philosophically, I think yes. We, in fact, have some agreements that require open access to those networks, and we did go ahead with them. So I know that in those cases, it was part of the business considerations, and we did still decide to go ahead with it. I think otherwise we're for competition, and we support wholesale customers downstream from us, even though that's not required. We do that, and we have always done that in order to continue to grow a healthy, competitive industry. I don't know why we wouldn't also do that on our fiber if it were appropriate.
That was basically what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, you heard earlier this week that there is a wholesale rate in theory, at which point you are agnostic between retail and wholesale. And, we currently offer wholesale, unmandated wholesale to our other services. So we would agree with that proposition that there would be a wholesale rate, where it would be appropriate for us. It wouldn't have really made a difference in terms of our choice to invest. And we don't really see that there is a specific, threshold or size of homes or serviceable addresses passed at which an FTTP network should not be mandated for wholesale. We see it more as, is there market power there that should be disciplined? And so, you know, in future, if the commission found that teksavvy had market power, then, you know, I think, I don't make the business choices, but we don't see a world where we would not be open to wholesale.
Great, thank you very much for your answers, I've appreciated it.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's go to Commissioner Naidu.
Hi there. Thank you so much for your answers today. In your opening remarks this morning, or this afternoon, you note that you now serve 100,000 fewer subscribers than you did at your peak. So I'm wondering if you can walk us through the timing of that. When did you reach your peak, and how quickly has that customer base fallen off?
Sure, once the rates started changing. So ultimately, when the 2021 rates came about, we had to raise our prices, and ultimately we started seeing a huge decline. Now, prior to that, we had seen a decline on the copper DSL of our services there, because customers wanted higher speeds, and we just didn't have any other option to offer them outside of the cable footprint, or because there was no fiber access there. So I don't want to add more to that, but we started the decline. The peak was 2019. I'd have to look at the numbers again, truthfully. And then once we started raising prices, when the decisions came out on the new costs, we raised our prices, and then we started seeing a decline even steeper, because we were now no longer competitive in the market.
I'll just maybe add as a gloss that you might think that this is an easier question to answer than it is, where we would just have sort of a counter going somewhere and we would see it go up and go down. But we, operate across every carrier, every incumbent that has mandated wholesale service, and there's different dynamics in each of those markets, different flanker brands in particular, the impact of the unavailability of fiber to us, and all of these different factors. So it has our customer count has gone up and down on different incumbents at different times. So it's really been a pattern that's been playing out since, 2017, 2018, but certainly accelerating in the past few years.
Would you say that it was, so you said that it was raising prices that led to sort of more of a steeper decline. Was it something that happened slowly, or did it happen quite quickly?
Well, there's raising pricing and lack of access to fiber. So there was lack of options available to the customer. So customer wanted higher speeds that we just couldn't offer them.
All right, so you mentioned speeds. What speeds and technologies were your customers on at the peak? So I guess the peak you had said is in 2019, right? And so around that time, what speed and technologies, but also where are your customers now?
So we primarily have speeds that are, we sell all speeds, right up to gigabit. And we've seen recently our customer base is actually increasing on the gigabit speed as well. We did see a much higher growth in the lower speeds, so I'm saying 100 and lower, but that has been we've been forced kind of there by the tariff rates. Ultimately, right after that, the tariff doubles, plus you add the CBB costs, and you add the operational costs and everything else. It just becomes a non-starter for the customer to start paying those elevated rates. So that's why, I can get you I can take an undertaking and give you the actual which speeds we're currently at, but ultimately we're below in terms of, less than 1 gigabit is our, the sweet spot would be our 50 meg to 100 meg customer base.
Okay, I'm going to let our legal team decide if we need an undertaking on that, and I'll let you know shortly. In your opening remarks, you also talk about how you've started to invest in disaggregated access. How many POIs have you established, and how long did it take to get to each POI?
I hope I'm allowed to say this in public because I'll do it. So we currently have 5 POIs enabled for disaggregated, and we've got a few more that we're sort of in the process of finishing the enablement. But we don't purchase any disaggregated fiber at those POIs, maybe a test case or two. But the rates, even though we've invested in the disaggregated infrastructure, the rates don't allow us to even sell fiber. And we had begun the process for interconnection at a number of additional POIs, more than that, but we recently stopped that work. And that was involving significant monthly costs for years. Those costs are now unrecoverable to us. We've abandoned that work. And maybe, just trying to think if there was one other point about disag POIs. I mean, I think we heard earlier this week about how much Bell has invested in disaggregated. We've invested, almost half of that, and we're certainly not Bell's size. So that might give you an indication of, we do see some markets where it might be viable for us, and we certainly chose those markets based on the customer uptake potential, and it would be a shame if those customers are now the ones who aren't able to get access to fiber.
Sticking with your opening remarks, that's kind of my theme here. You said that there were, quote, a few simple tweaks that you felt were needed to adjust the disaggregated framework. So I was hoping that you could flesh that out a bit. Can you tell us what those tweaks are that you were referring to?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. We see the sort of concerns with disaggregated as maybe falling into 2 categories. There's sort of a question about long-term, the importance of disaggregated as a framework, but also we have disaggregated right now, and there are going to be interactions with any new aggregated FTTP regime should that come to pass. So those tweaks, I think, really concern a transition period or a transition as that aggregated service comes in. The first thing is there is a clock ticking on disaggregated COs or POIs from 2015. There's a transition period of 3 years that once a competitor orders disaggregated services at a POI, that POI goes fully disaggregated after 3 years. So any competitors with customers served out of that POI are expected to, really required to, switch to disaggregated in order to continue to serve that population. That has continued to be in place, as far as we know, and the first POI that we're aware of that would switch over to fully disaggregated is in August this year. That means that any competitors who have not been aware of that or who have been thinking that disaggregated is gone or that this is all under review and they'll never be required to move to disaggregated would now have to scramble to move their customers over. It probably is not possible at this point for them to do that, I would guess, because of the length of time that it takes. In our view, that clock needs to be frozen urgently so that the rest of the interaction between disaggregated and the long-term viability of it can be figured out without this artificial pressure, I guess, of moving people over. Second issue is that once a competitor has moved their customers to disaggregated at a particular POI, there's no mechanism for them to go back to aggregated. And the incumbent is only required to provide one of disaggregated or aggregated to a given competitor at the POI. So if we have gone disaggregated at a POI, we've moved all our customers over to disaggregated at that POI. They're being served on disaggregated right now. Should you introduce an aggregated FTTP, well, even the temporary aggregated FTTP regime, it is not clear to us that we can serve customers who are served out of that POI on the aggregated framework. Because under the existing rules, we have now switched to disaggregated and they're only required to provide a service on disaggregated. This has an outsized impact because we have targeted exactly the areas where we wanted to be able to provide fiber to the prem. That's why we made the investment to do disaggregated. We've targeted exactly those POIs, and now there's the possibility that under the temporary regime, Bell or TELUS would prevent us from accessing customers in those areas on the temporary aggregated framework. And we think that that's that's clearly the wrong outcome. So there's some thinking that needs to be done about the transitional work of customers who have already moved to disaggregated and how those customers can be served on aggregated. And then there's maybe a very niche problem of the specific POI that the incumbent uses for the aggregated interconnection. So if that POI, the incumbent aggregates all their traffic back to one POI, and that's where we pick up the aggregated traffic. If that's the POI where we've decided to go disaggregated for the population served out of that POI, we need it to be very clear that, of course, we can continue to pick up aggregated traffic for the rest of the network out of that POI as well. So very specific clarifications, I think, that are required for just really the interaction between aggregated and disaggregated.
All right, well, thank you very much for, oh, sorry, please go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to add, and sort of the issue of the interim rates on disag, because right now, you have a connection that uses basically the same access facilities as aggregated, but the rates are significantly higher on disag. So that's sort of another tweak that, if you adjust those rates down as in the formula that we've suggested, it would get rid of those issues, and it might get rid of one of the issues of needing to switch customers to aggregated when they're already gone disaggregated. If the rates were properly set, then we wouldn't need to switch them back.
There is one issue about disaggregated that I don't think has come up in this hearing, and it's about specifically RF over glass, RFOG. Sometimes the cable companies will make a distinction between DOCSIS and FTTP. RFOG is a technology that is both. It is DOCSIS over FTTP. The Commission has found that RFOG services, because it involves a fiber going to the home, that RFOG services are FTTP, and therefore were only available to competitors under the disaggregated framework. That is, that was a decision of the Commission, but that's despite RFOG being essentially transparent to competitors. We rely on the same DOCSIS modems, the same equipment in the customer's home, and from time to time we discover that a customer who we have online got installed, is operating just fine. We're contacted by the incumbent that on an audit or another tech call in the neighborhood, it was discovered that that customer is actually served on fiber to the prem, and so they're going to be disconnected because we don't have that service available to us. So RFOG is this kind of intermediate technology that really has characteristics of both DOCSIS and FTTP that raises all kinds of operational concerns, like just qualifying addresses, for example, right now, that I think has maybe not had the attention that it deserves in at least decisions or letters or RFIs. But I hope that you consider RFOG specifically and the role that it plays and exactly where it falls. If you were to draw a distinction between DOCSIS and FTTP, it would raise a lot of questions about RFOG specifically.
Well, thank you very much for fleshing out those simple tweaks, which didn't sound all that simple necessarily. Much appreciated. As for that, the reference to the formal undertaking for that information, we don't need an undertaking on that. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Naidu. We'll go over to Commissioner Desmond now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I just have a few questions that are kind of left for clarification, so I shouldn't be too long. We've talked this afternoon about your ability to have access to reasonable rates using the current system. I'm wondering if you could share, not with, not getting into any confidential information, but are there particular companies where you've been able to make the rate work better for you than maybe other companies? And is there a reason why that is?
Are you asking about off-tariff agreements or more just the way the tariff is structured?
Well, maybe we could break it down. So if there are particular off-tariff agreements that have worked out with particular companies, is there a reason why that has worked better for you? Or looking at the tariff rate, is there a reason why you've had success with one particular company, and is there a reason why that is?
Thank you for the question. It is a little hard to answer about off-tariff agreements as fully as I'd really like to, because they are bound by confidentiality that I wish they weren't bound by. I wish that I could tell you all about them. So let's just start with the tariffs. There are certainly some price points, some rates, where we have found we can offer competitive service. We can, make a profit on a speed in a way that still offers a competitive price in the market. Those do tend to be lower speeds. And just for example, because I know they were something that we made submissions on, Cogeco 40 and 60 are examples. And this is public record because Rogers and Shaw were changing around some available speeds. We made submissions about, I think it was the 100 on, I think both of those, Rogers and Shaw, that this was one of the few speeds where we could offer a competitive service at a speed that people want. So sometimes it just comes out of the available, the tariffs and the pricing that's there in the market. There's one particular example of that, I guess, which was a particular price on one Rogers speed, which is sort of out of step, I guess, with the other prices. It's a lower price than the speed that's slower than it, and that's a historical artifact that has been carried over, and so obviously that makes that particular speed attractive for competitors. Off-tariff agreements, there's a lot of dynamics that go into off-tariff agreements. As far as I know, we don't have any off-tariff agreements now for speeds. In the past, we have found, so our view is off-tariff agreements are basically a symptom of the system not working well. They come into play when the rates are high and we're unable to rely on the tariffed rates to offer competitive services, and that gives incumbents the space to pick and choose, offer us a path to offer some speeds, and they can sometimes direct us which speeds to offer. So sometimes off-tariff agreements are structured in a way that encourage or require us to sell certain speeds. Those are always lower speeds. That hasn't happened recently because basically off-tariff agreements have not been in play in our experience on speeds, at least, very much. I'm qualifying about speeds because different incumbents take slightly different views of what would require an off-tariff agreement. There are some services that some of them offer that are not technically covered by the tariff or the regime, the framework. An example would be if they gave us particular access to a portal that was through some kind of an API, then someone might require a off-tariff agreement in order to make this available. That's not the kind of thing that really changes the dynamic of the market in the way that OTAs that change pricing do. But they are kind of funny little enhancements to the framework that are treated as off-tariff. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Can I just add one little thing on off tariffs? I'm the one who most of the time gets the call for an off tariff agreement. I make the calls out all the time to try and see if we can negotiate some deals. to try and get things running for better rates. And it's a very one-way street, as in it's them that will offer whatever they feel they need to most of the time hit the quarter numbers that they're trying to achieve. So, I'll get the call, Pierre, hey, can you get an extra 2,000 subs, this quarter? And then we're going to offer you this offer. But outside of that, if I'm going out and saying, hey, can we get access? Let's talk about getting access to this or that or this. It's fallen most often on mute, deaf ears. It just won't be there. So just thought I would add that.
Maybe I'll just, to sort of wrap that up to a point I keep coming back to, these off-tariff agreements that function in this way, when the incumbent comes to us to use us in order to gain some market share basically onto their network. This is a competitive dynamic. This is us being essentially pawns in a competitive dynamic between incumbents that does not advance the competitive goals of the framework where we would discipline the market power of the incumbents. I hope that's clear.
That's helpful, thank you. I had a question of clarification. I know in your submission this morning or this afternoon, you talked about how you agreed with the CNOC proposal and that the big three wouldn't be using the networks of others and there'd be no in-territory use. But in response to a question from the vice chair, he asked you if you rolled out your network and the rate was set properly, you could be agnostic about whether or not you would provide wholesale access. But I'm wondering about the smaller players, because I think you told us that the smaller regional players would not be part of the mandatory access. But in this instance, you did say you thought you'd be in a position to roll out and provide access. So I'm just trying to put those two thoughts together and make them work.
I hope that I'm understanding your question right, but I want to be really clear. We don't think that it would be appropriate at all to consider a mandate for teksavvy's fiber to the home network. It is a fiber to the home network in Chatham. We do not exercise market power in any measure that we would need to be disciplined by other competitors. And that has always been the initial threshold for imposing mandatory service on somebody, on a provider. So we don't think that we're anywhere close to, to that kind of thing happening. I may not have understood what you were asking about it not applying to other regional providers.
That makes sense, because we've talked about the market discipline and having market power. It was just in response to the question from the vice chair that, the conversation about whether you'd be agnostic and being willing to provide service on your fiber network. And, if that was the case, what about other smaller players like yourself? And I think your position is that you didn't feel at this time that they had the market power to necessarily be required to provide access.
We have a long tradition of offering downstream wholesale services. Downstream from, we buy wholesale services and then we offer wholesale services to smaller providers who are just not large enough to enter into the agreements with a carrier and get the interconnections and buy capacity and all of that. And so we manage that for them. That's a service that we offer that is not mandated, it's not regulated, and we do it to encourage the growth of a competitive market. That's very different from what the incumbents would do. I doubt that they would offer downstream wholesale services like that if they were not mandated to do it. So I think that's, a key difference why that mandate should not apply to us.
Okay, thank you. That does clarify. Thank you. There's been a suggestion, I think, through this past week that the commission freeze the fiber to the node rates. I'm not sure if you were kind of aware of that conversation that was going on in the last couple of days, but I'm wondering if you could perhaps comment on that. And then I think TELUS also suggested that the fiber to the node be discontinued where there is fiber to the premise. So wondering if you could have, share your thoughts on that.
Sure. So for the rates, for the FTTN rates, we're talking specifically about ILECs. We would say that the rates in market right now don't currently reflect costs, and there still are lots of homes that are not served on FTTP on those networks. So we wouldn't, want to sort of doubly disadvantage those consumers who currently can't take advantage of fiber and also have retail rates that are not properly disciplined. So we think, the commission has gotten cost studies, it's initiated a costing review. It's something that, the next logical step is to set those costs. In future, we do agree that, those rates might be open to being frozen, but we think certainly right now we're at rates that, if you look at 2021, that decision, they chose not to undergo a full review. So we're at rates that have not been reviewed. We'd like those rates to be reviewed so we can properly compete for those customers who do rely on FTTN from ILECs. But yes, there is a path forward where we think it would be appropriate to freeze those, provided we have access to fiber.
Maybe I'll just, sorry, to address specifically, you talked about TELUS's proposal. I think that's closely related actually to decommissioning, because what I think they want to do is not maintain a copper network once they've rolled out fiber. And I think, we have no preference for copper in principle. It would be great to be able to move to fiber if we have access to the network and if the rates are appropriate and, speeds are available to at workable prices for our customers. So I think it is premature to decide to forbear from regulating FTTN or to freeze the FTTN rates. But I think that the incumbents are going to accelerate decommissioning, and they will likely do it in a way that's invisible to us, because, of course, they'll be removing it from exactly the addresses we don't serve. As far as I know, before this hearing, the statements from incumbents on the record had been that they had no plans to decommission copper. Certainly in the previous wholesale review and in a number of follow-up proceedings, the official position was that they had no plans on a large scale to decommission copper. What we're hearing this week is very, very different from that. And, I guess I would suggest that the commission may want to introduce a way to review or understand the scale of that, those decommissioning operations, because that information will be very important when it comes to the questions that you're asking about forbearing from FTTN, because, of course, the footprint will have shrunk quite a bit, and otherwise nobody will really know by how much.
Just on the point of decommissioning, and I know you had a conversation with the chair about the impact of decommissioning. I just wanted to have a follow-up question on that. When copper is decommissioned, and I think you did suggest that they offer alternatives, can you speak a bit more about the alternatives they offer and how that's worked?
I might ask Pierre to add some detail to this, because ultimately it's an off-tariff agreement of sorts. This has happened different ways for different incumbents. I think, you've heard in this hearing that TELUS has a particular practice around it. We have not, as far as I know, taken up the offer. Any offer from TELUS? Okay, we've not, as far as I know, taken up any offer from TELUS to use fiber and move customers over to it. We see that as a stopgap retail measure that is not wholesale. It basically does an end run around the regulated framework. And at a time when I think it is important for competitors to demonstrate the importance of the regulated framework to us. So we have continued to rely on this. That has meant a shrinking footprint on that particular incumbent. Others have done it in sort of different ways. Either we sort of just discover over time that we have lost access to certain addresses, or an MDU that clearly once had cable coax in it has now been renovated and we don't seem to have access to it anymore. We look at street view images of the building. It's clearly old enough that it had coax, but now it qualifies as fiber only. So there's a huge anecdotal record of shrinking, a shrinking footprint. None of those cases involve the incumbent coming to us and offering us some kind of alternative. Also sort of anecdotally, but I think it's a good example of the operational challenges here. In 2015, we were notified that Rogers was doing some work and upgrading a neighborhood to FTTP. And the work had already been largely done, and we filed a Part 1 application. So what I'm saying is already public record. We challenged that, and what we got in a commission decision was, as a remedy, access to Rogers fiber to the home network in that area. Now, it's true that we kept our customers at the time, the customers we had not already lost just because of the sort of information issues around it. We kept the customers, but keeping the neighborhood became very difficult because in Rogers' database, those addresses came up as fiber only. They didn't make special accommodation and flag those as being in a special neighborhood that was available to competitors. So they were fiber only. Then the burden would have been on us to put in our database in some way that, oh, if you get rejected on one of these addresses, you can escalate it because actually those are available to us. And so in the end, we lost customers in that neighborhood. The addresses come up as fiber only, and the result was Rogers' upgrade to fiber resulted in a loss of competition in that neighborhood. I can't speak for other competitors, but certainly from teksavvy's perspective.
I think I heard you say that you've not taken up the offer for alternatives, or that you haven't been offered any alternatives.
No, we haven't been offered alternatives other than in the TELUS area, but we haven't been offered alternatives, no.
And I think we'd want to highlight that when those alternatives are offered, which might be, just pure resale, those are to your specific customers that you already have service with. It doesn't deal with the issue of every address that is now becoming not serviceable. It's not an offer to continue serving any, address that's been turned off. And so it causes issues in terms of churn. We can't get an address back necessarily, and another wholesale competitor doesn't have access to that service, even if we might be able to continue a retail resale option. So those kind of offers to continue servicing customers on retail don't really address the bigger issue of the addressable market shrinking.
Okay, I'm going to ask you for an undertaking, and the answer might be 0, which is fine. But maybe if you're willing to provide the undertaking, I'm sure it would be quite easy for you to respond to. And it's the same undertaking we've asked of other parties, and that is to provide documentation, if any, that would evidence reception of notice of copper decommissioning and the alternatives that have been proposed since 2018. So if the answer is 0, that's fine, but if you don't mind taking the undertaking.
We can take that undertaking, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have one last question, and it really is about kind of your future plans. In November of 2023, as you know, the Commission did grant temporary and expedited access on the Bell and TELUS FTTP networks effective May. Do you have plans vis-a-vis accessing that, what impact it'll have on your customer base, sort of how you think that will be beneficial or not?
Well, now that I heard that CNOC's members are going to be offering it, I guess we need to, and that's the competitive dynamics at play. We are planning to, all kidding aside, we are planning to use that temporary FTTP, temporary aggregated FTTP framework and offer services to our customers. Now, the rates are high for us, given the price, you know, the market price for similar speeds from incumbents. So it's going to be very challenging for us. But our customers want fiber. We have been fighting for fiber for a long time, and we will take up any solutions that the commission offers to us, where we can try to build a market and demonstrate that we are trying to use that framework to the best of our ability. So I think it will be very challenging, but yeah, we are working on that actively. All of the background work that needs to go on, understanding the customer premises equipment that's required, getting interconnections in place, understanding the costs of providing that service, and we're planning to be ready to offer it on May 7th.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll do it faster than CNOC. He said 9 o'clock, I'll say 12:01.
I do hope that the record will reflect the laughter by CNOC in response to teksavvy's responses. Thank you very much. You have answered a lot of questions. The panel really appreciates the discussion that we've had with you this afternoon. We would like to turn things back over to you for concluding remarks.
Well, thank you very much. Jessica will close things off for us, but first I just wanted to thank the chairperson and the vice chair and the commissioners for the opportunity to appear here and discuss all of these issues. I also want to thank CRTC staff for reading and researching and summarizing, no doubt, our many, many submissions. I know how important and challenging that can be, and I really appreciate that work. Not to mention this very long week.
So maybe we'll leave you with, over the past 10 years, competition in wireline internet services has indisputably declined. The largest incumbents have gained market share, and this has entrenched their market power. This has reduced our ability to bring competitive choices to consumers, including as a strong advocate for the open internet, and by investing in building our own facilities. This reduction in competition has accelerated through opportunistic acquisitions that have eliminated all but a few competitors. We are asking the Commission to help allow us bring vibrant service-based competition to internet users across Canada on the speeds of their choice, not just in Ontario and Quebec, and not just in cities. This requires properly costed wholesale rates that take into account the actual retail rates that incumbents have in market. It requires nationwide mandated aggregated access to fiber. These are actually not novel asks. We are asking you to restore the basic planks of wholesale, speed matching, and properly costed rates. Bell told you that it is okay to say no to competitors. What they really mean is it's okay to say no to competition. Incumbents have enjoyed a regulatory holiday on fiber networks for too long. Everybody likes having a vacation, and it's hard when it ends. But it's okay for the Commission to end their vacation now. Consumers are tired of paying for it. Thank you again, Commission and Commission staff, for your attention and your work this week. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for ending this week-long hearing with us.
Thank you. So this therefore concludes the presentations of the participants. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Okay, perhaps just before bringing the hearing to a formal close, on behalf of the panel, I would just like to thank everyone who participated in this hearing. We know how much time and effort is required to take part in the hearings, and we're very appreciative of everyone who shared their perspectives. Our focus over the past week has been to find new ways to address pressing issues in Canada's internet services industry, and you've all helped us understand better the realities that come with making difficult choices in the public interest. After hearing from 22 groups, including providers, competitors, consumer groups, individuals, government agencies, some common themes have emerged, and maybe I can just briefly touch on 3 of those. First, how important affordable internet access is for Canadians. We heard from everyone just how much Canadians need high-quality internet services at affordable prices. We were reminded of the key role that internet services play in enabling a wide range of economic and social activity, like helping Canadians find employment, keeping in touch with family and friends, and accessing things like healthcare and schooling. Second, we heard that competition is vital. We heard different views on the forces that drive competition. Many large companies talked about the challenge of deploying better and faster networks across Canada and how those investments enable them to compete in the market. Independent providers told us about the difficulties that they face in providing options for Canadians. And consumer groups and individuals told us that the status quo isn't working and that Canadians need more from their internet service providers. Troisièmement, l'importance d'atteindre le bon équilibre. On nous a fait part du besoin de continuer à avancer rapidement pour stabiliser le marché en trouvant le bon équilibre pour toutes les parties impliquées. Un juste milieu, ou zone boucle d'or, that's Goldilocks, pour emprunter une métaphore que le vice-président Scott a utilisée tout au long de la semaine. Nous devons trouver une solution qui produit des investissements dans les réseaux et qui, dans la même foulée, permet aux consommateurs de bénéficier de choix. Trouver cet équilibre est la tâche complexe qui s'étend devant nous alors que nous poursuivons la présente instance et votre participation continue sera essentielle. Comme beaucoup d'entre vous le savent, nous avons envoyé des demandes de renseignements supplémentaires à la fin du mois de janvier. Les réponses à cette demande sont attendues pour le 1er mars. Nous encourageons toutes les parties à surveiller les dossiers publics. Des réponses y seront déposées. Vous aurez l'occasion de commenter ces renseignements additionnels à l'étape des soumissions écrites finales. Ces renseignements contribueront à constituer un dossier solide et encore plus complet sur lequel nous pourrons prendre des décisions fondées sur des données probantes dans l'intérêt public. So let me end by thanking everyone again. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for taking the time to submit interventions and for participating in the process. As teksavvy started their closing remarks, they offered some thank yous, including to the CRTC team. I would like to say thank you to our team who's done an incredible amount of work leading up to and during the hearing, and that work will continue. I'd like to thank everybody else as well who pulled off this very smooth hearing this week, the stenographers, the interpreters, technicians who helped make this possible. So thank you. A lot of them are back there. So on that note, I will now bring this public hearing on the review of the wholesale high-speed access framework to a close and wish everybody a wonderful weekend. Merci beaucoup et bonne fin de semaine à tous. Merci.